speaker doesn't really need an introduction, but I will give him one anyway, because he must be the most well-travelled person in Britain at the moment, going up and down the country, speaking at meetings like these to people about respect. He is a Member of Parliament, heading Respect in the European elections in London, and has been consistent around standing up and speaking out against this immoral and illegal war in Iraq. Please welcome George Galloway.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Chair, brothers and sisters, comrades and friends, Wassalamu alaikum, peace be with you. I left home at 8 o'clock this morning. It took me 5.5 hours to drive from London to Bradford. Mr. Blair constantly boasts that Britain has the finest armed forces in the world. I wish the M1 was the finest motorway. I wish our railways were the best armed forces in the world, and heaven knows they're getting plenty of practice. 5 Fridays ago, Tony Blair spoke at a champagne soiree in Goldman Sachs, the merchant bankers in the City of London. You only know about it if you read the Financial Times. For understandable reasons, they kept the discourse that evening as quiet as they could. You remember Goldman Sachs? They're so filthy rich in Goldman Sachs, their secretaries can steal £4.6 million out of their bank accounts and they don't even notice it for 2.5 years. That's how rich they are in Goldman Sachs. Well, Tony went to speak to an audience of champagne-swilling elite city slickers. Every one of them there was a part of the 1% of the British population earning in excess of £150,000 a year. And Tony Blair, the new Labour Prime Minister, reported in the Financial Times, boasted that every person in the room was now paying less income tax than they were under Margaret Thatcher. He should be ashamed of the fact that every person in that room is paying less income tax than they were under Margaret Thatcher. Because, of course, the opportunity cost of that is represented on this platform, and made the first 2 speeches on this platform. The reason why the civil servants are paid poverty pay, hundreds of thousands of them earning less than £13,000 a year, is directly because the richest people in our country have gotten 30% richer under Tony Blair and are paying less tax. The reason why Sue was able to speak so movingly about the plight of our 5 million pensioners is because the rich are rich and getting richer. Never mind the personal income tax of the elite. Let's think about the tax yield of British business, which is booming, which is the 4th richest economy in the world. 4 companies, just 4. Last year, just 1 year, the big 4 British banks together made £23.6 billion profit off you. That profit came from you. Their charges and their interest rates levied on you. And now, as Sue tells us, they're trying to do away with the pension book and the post office savings account so that you'll be forced to get your pension paid into one of the big 4 banks so they can make even more profits. These things are intimately connected one with the other. I tell you, scarcely a company in Britain today is paying any tax at all. Corporation tax yields as a proportion of the national economy are lower than they were in the Depression of the 1930s. Rich individuals are paying less tax. Rich companies are paying less tax. The rich are getting richer, the poor are getting poorer. And the gap between rich and poor in Britain today is wider than it was when Charles Dickens was chronicling the Victorian slums and the gin parlours of poverty-stricken London. This truly is a tale of two cities, two countries, and there's no doubt which city, which country, which side Tony Blair and New Labour are on. All of these attacks on our public services, for that's what they are. If you say in the fourth richest country in the world to millions of students that you will not be able to go to university unless you're prepared to leave with a mortgage round your neck before you've even bought a house, this is an attack not only on the young people who may very well, quite likely, in increasing numbers in the next period decide that higher education is not for them, like so many working class people did in the 30s and 40s and 50s. But it's an attack on the rest of us, because of course higher education is not a cost, it's a benefit. It's not a cost, it's an investment. And it's an investment by the country in itself. Because of course, if we don't produce graduates, if we don't educate our young people better and better each year, how long will we be the fourth richest economy in the world? Inevitably, we'll begin to fall back, and the wealth that we create will begin to shrink. I heard on the radio a few weeks ago some young women graduates in Slovakia. The reason the radio was over there was because the papers were full of this scare story that all of Slovakia was on its way to Sheffield. You know, I heard that noise from the microphone earlier. It reminded me of the sound of the shipyards on the Clyde that used to build the finest ships in the world made of Sheffield steel. And now the Clyde and Sheffield are industrial museums, theme parks, conference centres, service stations, though God knows who we're going to serve in the future. But I heard these young women graduates, and they were asked by the BBC, are you on your way to Sheffield? And of course they spoke very good English, these young women, because despite its many problems, the system they had in Czechoslovakia educated its people extremely well. And the young women laughed. They said, no, we're going to Germany. They said, we're graduates. We want to become PhDs. And it's free in Germany to become a PhD. It's free to get university education in Germany. Why? Because the Germans are charitable? No. Because the Germans know that to be an economic power you need an educated generation of young people constantly renewing itself, and they know that these Slovakian girls, when they get their PhDs, will likely stay in Germany and contribute to the building up of the German economy. So this attack on the higher education sector is not just about equity. It's not just about the unfairness of it all for the young people concerned. It's cutting the throat of our own industrial future. And our pensioners. This Sue was talking about. She said she got emotional. I was getting emotional when I watched these hypocrites, their faces waxed with grief at the cenotaph every year. Their poppies getting bigger and bigger. They're practically pulling them over, the size of their poppies. They're wearing them from September to December. You can't go on the TV or appear in the House of Commons without a giant poppy. While they're literally condemning our old age pensioners to decide of a cold winter evening whether to switch on another bar on the electric fire or whether to keep money for the lunch tomorrow. In Glasgow, Strathclyde University have just done a survey which shows that pensioners in Glasgow are more likely to die of the cold than any other pensioners in all of Europe, including Siberia. And in my constituency in Glasgow, back to back, you have the poorest estate in the city and literally a stone's throw away across a beautiful green river and valley, the richest part of Scotland, Bearsden and Milngavie. And last week it was shown that the average life expectancy in that part of my constituency is 10 full years less than the life expectancy a stone's throw away in Bearsden. We're not talking about two countries, two continents, first world, third world. We're talking about a stone's throw away. You get 10 more years of life. And the reason is poverty. That's what's killing our old age pensioners in this country today. Poverty. 7 years in to a new Labour government that's got billions of pounds to fly around the world, setting fire to other people's countries, destroying other people's lives, but no money to pay for the lives of our own people here in this country. And that's why we've been called into being. That's why we have emerged out of the anti-war movement to challenge this government of betrayers. Of course, we could talk all night about the betrayals on the domestic level. But I want to talk about the betrayals on the level of international policy and its concurrent impact on the life of our minorities here at home. For it's my case that the other side of the coin of making war abroad is the making war on sections of our own population here at home. And I'm saying this precisely because most of the people in this room are not from ethnic minorities. I want to address the majority community on this. A few days ago I was campaigning in Leytonstone in East London. A young man, young family man, a Muslim man with two small children, toddlers, stopped me in the street and he asked me a question the like of which I never was asked in my life before, which stunned me, left me speechless. He said, in the 1920s and 30s in Germany, the Jewish people were an integral part of the German economy. They'd been there for hundreds of years. They were Germans. Many of them were very rich. And yet look what happened to them, he said. And then he asked, Mr. Galloway, do you think there's any possibility that something like that could happen to us here? In Britain in 2004, there are people with families walking around wondering if some murderous pogrom might descend upon them out of all this turmoil and backwash that's going on in the world today. Now, I happen to believe there is virtually no chance at all of any such thing happening to the Muslim population here in Britain. Not least because of the great alliance that we have built in the anti-war movement and now in Respect the Unity Coalition. But the fact that there are Muslims in Britain who are afraid of such a thing speaks volumes. And everywhere I go, including the mosque here this afternoon and the Bradford meeting earlier today, I find minority populations, most of them Muslim, although you don't need to be a Muslim to be attacked by the racists. I can give you lots of examples of Sikh people being attacked in the street by idiots who are attacking them and who think they're Muslims, smearing graffiti on their shops and so on. But this is mainly, at this point in our history, affecting the Muslim population. Everywhere I go, that population is anxious, is fearful, is frightened of the future. They're frightened of the press. They're frightened of the police. They're frightened of the BNP. And they're frightened of the bright side racist bigot David Blunkett, the Home Secretary of Great Britain. Whose every utterance, whose every foray into the legislative arena is feeding the beasts of bigotry and racism in this country. And I tell you this, he's a blot on the landscape. He's a disgrace to Sheffield, a great socialist trade union city. And at the next general election, I hope they get rid of him in Sheffield right side. Every time he makes an announcement, of course they merely up the ante. As I told him this, I once asked him in the corridor of the Parliament, why do you say these things that you say? It was in the wake of his comment that ethnic minority people should not speak their own language to their own parents in their own houses in case they developed schizophrenia, he called it. Just as well they don't apply that down on the Costa del Sol, where the British expats can't even order a pint of lager in Spanish. And he answered me, we have to take the approach that we're taking, or the far right will gain in strength in Britain. Well, quite apart from the fact that it's no more comfortable being attacked by someone calling himself a social democrat than it is being attacked in the same way by someone calling themselves a fascist. The logic, of course, is completely ludicrous, because the more you feed these beasts, the harder they become. That's the lesson of all history. If you set targets, they'll set lower targets. If you introduce new laws, they'll demand even more laws. If you try and cut the numbers of visitors, immigrants, asylum seekers, they'll demand lower numbers still. And then they'll set the right-wing press to work to say that the numbers aren't being cut anyway. This is a Dutch auction which can only lead to disaster. The very basic, essential purpose of a social democrat, a Labour person, is to defend multiculturalism, defend minority communities, defend those who need your protection. If you can't even live up to that standard, then you have no right calling yourself a Labour person at all. And Blunkett fails that test. He fails that test. I was going to speak for another 25 minutes.
Don't think so.
He sums up everything that's wrong with New Labour, which has metamorphosed into anti-Labour. There's nothing Labour about this. There's nothing Labour about a government betraying trade unionists and pensioners and students and immigrants and minorities and asylum seekers. What's Labour about that? And if you don't punish it, then it's going to get worse and worse. Because if they think that they can count on your support, whatever they do, whatever they say, why should they stop this trajectory on which they have embarked? And of course, they're paying an even bigger price abroad. When the leaders of Hamas, 2 of them, were slain in the Gaza Strip in the last few weeks, the aircraft that cruelly killed them was, of course, flown by an Israeli pilot. But the aircraft was given to Israel by the United States of America. And the avionics in the aircraft were supplied under New Labour's ethical foreign policy by British Aerospace with a British export licence, and funded, if Sharon welched on the payments, by you, the taxpayer, through the Export Credit Guarantee Scheme. That's the axis of evil that starts in Pennsylvania Avenue, Washington, D.C., runs through Downing Street, and ends in General Sharon's cabinet room in occupied Jerusalem in Palestine. And those are the 3 most hated countries in the world. America, Israel, and Britain are the 3 most hated countries in the world. And yet we, all of us, and millions of us throughout the country, oppose every single thing that's being done, which is making us hated. But how can we prove that if our government keeps getting re-elected? If on the 10th of June they sail through these elections, how can we claim that they don't speak in our name? So it's not rocket science, this. You really just have to work out whether you want Tony Blair to declare a victory on the 10th of June for everything he's done, or you want it to be inescapably, undeniably a defeat. And I think we owe it to the pensioners, to the trade unionists, to the minorities. We owe it to the people of Afghanistan. We owe it to the people of Palestine. We owe it to the people of Fallujah, who have just withstood a massacre and who are withstanding it still, proving that though the Americans control the heavens above Iraq, but only if they don't fly too low, they can't control a single street in any town, village or city in Iraq, because the people have risen up to resist them and to repel them, and will go on doing so. And we owe it to all of these people to return respect in this constituency on the 10th of June, although in this constituency it's not the 10th of June. You don't even have to go to the polling stations. All the votes in your household will come through your letterbox. And it's quite likely, in other circumstances, many of them would just not be filled in or returned, might be thrown straight in the bin. We have to be determined between now and the 23rd, 25th of May, when these ballots come out, to organize ourselves, organize our own families, talk to our families and say, there are 3 of us in here, 5 of us in here, or in one of the houses I was in today, 16 of us in here. MashaAllah, MashaAllah. And we have to organize the families, decide how you're going to vote, discuss it, and make sure those votes go into the envelopes and back to the returning officer. We can elect the most outstanding Muslim figure in Great Britain today in Anas Al-Takriti. He would be the best possible voice that Yorkshire and the Humber could have in the European Parliament. Crystal clear, eloquent, educated, sincere, devoted, just, and religious. He sums up the coalition that we've built, and you have a chance to wipe that smile off Tony Blair's face on the 10th of June. Believe me, he's watching these results very closely. The last result in the whole world that he wants to see on the 10th of June is me being elected in London to the European Parliament. But I don't want to go on my own. Have you seen Brussels? I don't want to go on my own. I want my big pal Anas with me, my right arm. Please send him there. Thank you very much.
Very much indeed, George. I'm now...
Sorry. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum and good evening, everybody. I am a bit nervous here, so please forgive me if some words get crossed. I'm a trade unionist. I represent the taxi drivers. You may have, some of you here may know my face. I drive taxis all over Sheffield. I do thousands of miles around the streets of Sheffield. And I'm proud of Sheffield as well, right? And I joined Respect about a month ago. Before this, I must say, I was a Labour man. I used to vote for Labour, as my father did, as most of our community did. We voted for Labour. But before we knew it, we didn't even know that from Labour, it had changed to New Labour. It is totally different to the Labour that my father knew and then I knew. It has become a fascist party, unknowingly to us, right? But now it is very clear now that it is not the Labour that we knew, unfortunately. But fear not, because we have now Respect. Respect is a party of people of all races, all creed, black, brown, blue, of all colours. We are all united. As like Mr. George Galloway said, we are working class people, and the war in Iraq is not really about Muslims. Don't be fooled by the media out there, please. All these media is saying it's about Islam and it's about Jews and it's about Christians. It's not neither. What this really is about the working class people and the rich people. The rich people want to get richer and they want to oppress the working class people. And we mustn't, please, we mustn't let them get away with that. I'm not here, I want to...
There are many differences between us and the Socialist Labour Party set up by Arthur Scargill in 1994, after the scrapping of Clause 4. First of all, it was set up on a downbeat. It was set up after the defeat of John Major, the victory of John Major in 1992, the defeat of Labour, and the defeat that flowed from the death of John Smith, who was a Labour figure. He was to the right of me, but he was a genuine Labour figure. And then Labour elected Tony Blair and began the demoralisation, the downbeat. So Scargill created his new party on a downer. It's our belief that we're creating this new movement on an upswing. There was no mass anti-war movement or mass movement of any kind when Scargill started in '94. there now is the basis of that 2 million who marched, our core constituency. We must be wider and bigger than that, but that's our core constituency, and Arthur had nothing like that. He also made many mistakes, and we're determined not to repeat these mistakes. There's no one-manism in this organization. We don't have a leader. We are a democratic party where the leaders are elected, the policy is chosen by the members, one member, one vote. There's no exclusion, there's nobody being expelled. Anybody who supports our foundation statement can join us. Not, as Arthur did, embarked upon a round of expulsions from day one. I don't mean to sound like I disrespect Arthur Scargill, because I don't. He's a personal friend of mine. I bled with him on the Great Strike 20 years ago. But he's not a very good political leader. He made too many mistakes, and he minimized and narrowed the base of the breakaway that he formed. It was the wrong time and the wrong way. And I think that we have avoided all of these. For a start, we're a coalition. For a start, we're in alliance with the Muslim population in the country, which Scargill never was. And we have the great anti-war movement at our back. Now, the danger of a terrorist atrocity in Britain is very real. And I want to say as absolutely clearly and unequivocally as I can, there may be people who have been seduced down a path which will be very destructive to them and very destructive to the Muslim community and very destructive to relations in our country. If there's anybody out there who thinks that a bomb like Madrid will harm Tony Blair, let me assure them that a bomb like Madrid would help Tony Blair. He'd be strengthened by a bomb like Madrid. What we're saying, especially to young Muslims, some of whom have been seduced by some very rum elements. When I see some of them on the television and on the radio, extremists who speak for only a few dozen, maybe a couple of hundred people, and the things that they say, I say to myself, if these people didn't exist, the enemies of the Muslims would have to invent them. And maybe they did invent them. Maybe they didn't. They may very well have invented them. They may be in them, trying to draw people into such activities which can only damage all of us. What we're offering in respect to young, angry Muslims is a peaceful, democratic, and much, much more effective way of wiping the smile off Tony Blair's face, and that's called respect.